On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we are not rolling on the river. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. So, I had a couple of stories. We've been doing a lot in inland waterways, which is great. I always mean to hit different areas of shipping, and I always talk about ocean shipping, but I should talk about global shipping. And today we're talking about the Mississippi River again. Now, we've had a couple of stories on the Mississippi River. We had one where a barge derailed a train. Yes, a barge hit a train. But we also have had a couple of stories about the low water levels right now on the Mississippi River, which is not unusual for early autumn. We see this happen on the river a lot. But right now we're seeing an unusually low water. Not the historic low. I mean, it's not like it's the lowest it's ever been. But this is causing a major disruption. So we're going to take a look at those stories and the impact it's having right now. Before we do so, if you're new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this story. So, New York Times, featuring a story, Shrunken Mississippi River Snarls Barge Traffic and Imperils Drinking Supplies. I show this story not to go in detail about it, but just to show it's making the mainstream. And usually when the mainstream starts picking up a story about shipping, that it's of significance. And it also means that they're going to miss a couple of key things, which is why you tune into this channel, because we're going to go in some detail here and go below the surface of what they do on their news report. So this is marine traffic, and you'll see the snarl right here, dead center in your map, right here, just below the Mississippi, Tennessee state line, just below Memphis, all the way up here to roughly around Greenville, Mississippi. Now, we reported the low water being below Cairo, Illinois, down to Memphis and that region just below it. And that's what we're seeing right now. But let's go ahead and look at some of the stories here that have the information for us. So this is over at Maritime Executive. Lower Mississippi closed in 2 places due to low water and grounding. And the story right here, and I'm going to pull it up here for you. A low water advisory is in effect for a 550-mile stretch of the lower Mississippi from mile markers 859 to 303, and drafts are limited to 9.5 feet. Barges are usually around 11 feet. The Coast Guard has reminded towboat masters on their obligations to create a voyage plan and navigate with due diligence with a particular eye to draft under keel clearance and maneuvering room. The river's water level is currently the 8th lowest on record, and some riverine ports are expected to see record lows in the weeks ahead. At least 8 groundings have been reported in recent weeks, and the Coast Guard have been working with the Corps of Engineers to refloat stuck barges and dredge trouble spots. So this map is really the indication for you why this is all happening, and this is the massive drought that's happening out west of the Mississippi. The Mississippi is low because the tributaries, all the water that forms its basin, and the Mississippi Basin is huge, is not filling into it. And what we're seeing here is those big red areas across Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, up into Iowa and South Dakota is impacting water going into the system. And just the lack of rain of anything is really impeding the ability for the river to come up in its draft. Come down here, this stat I thought was really interesting. U.S. Mississippi barge freight rates leap as very low water levels restrict downstream corn, soybean, wheat supplies to Gulf ports just at the busiest time of the season. Gulf prices now make U.S. corn uncompetitive against key alternatives. Again, this is with the Black Sea, Ukraine, Russia at war. Read you a stat here. About 39% fewer barges have made it downriver to the ports below the Mississippi River Bridge. So, in other words, from Baton Rouge all the way down to the mouth, these barges have made it, are short-loaded. This is from the Louisiana Agricultural Commissioner. Short-loaded means they're not as heavy as they were because they got to stay light to get past the 9.5-foot limit here. And so we're getting less cargo down. Go over to this story from G Captain. Coast Guard dredging underway to reopen sections of the lower Mississippi River. The problem with dredging is you can only dredge so much. And dredging feet is a big problem. There just is not enough dredges or the ability to put the spoil in places. And so even with dredging, they're just really targeting dredging areas here to get these barges downriver with their tows. But at the same time, we're seeing things like this. Ingram Barge declares force majeure due to low water on the Mississippi. Force majeure means force of nature. And what is happening here is this company is basically saying that we're not going to be able to meet our obligations. Therefore, you can't hold us to these contracts because of issues beyond our control. Basically, it's an act of God, but mariners don't, or heathen, terrible people don't believe in God, and therefore we call it force majeure. I'm just kidding. They're there's many that are God fearing. But this story here is really important because Ingram is one of the largest shippers in the United States when it comes to tugs and barge. The declaration will affect a portion of Ingram's operating networks at location downriver from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So they are already saying, listen, we're not going to be able to get our deliveries there on time. We're going to miss this. Therefore, we can't be penalized for it. And you can do that in shipping when you have this. We've seen force majeure declared at multiple times before. We've seen it with the shipyards, with the delivery of vessels during COVID, and now we're seeing it again here. This story, I think, is really the one most interesting. This is a Bloomberg story that GCAP has. Mississippi River drought imperils trade. Here's why. So if you want the stats, this is the one with the stats. So let's go ahead and take a look here and look at the stats that are on here. I need to put on my reading glasses and look very educated. So we already talked about the dryness and what this is. So in 2012, for instance, drought led to $35 billion in losses for the United States, including closing the river 3 times. Top barge operator Ingram said low water levels are affecting part of its operation, which we just said. A barge carries about 1,750 tons of dry cargo, equivalent of 70 trucks, and I'll have an equivalency here for you in a minute. But the reason here is very simple: the lack of rain. There is no rain coming in. Minneapolis received about 1/4 of an inch of rain in the past 30 days. The average is almost 3 inches. But you come down here, it's in the market. So let's look at each of the markets that are being affected by this. So first, grain. Some 60% of all grain exported from the U.S. is shipped along the river through New Orleans and the port of South Louisiana, according to the National Park Service. The jam comes as farmers are in the middle of fall harvest, just when they'll need to transport a lot of crops on the waterway. The stoppage could cause exports to drop. It's extremely serious because of the time of year. This is exactly when the seasonal move of soybeans is happening. Volume on the waterway is effectively 45% less. Come down here to fertilizer. Farmers in the U.S. apply fertilizer in November, and a slowdown in river traffic could delay these crop inputs from reaching the Corn Belt. As grain goes down, fertilizer comes up. About 1/3 of U.S. consumption of the common nitrogen fertilizer, urea, moves on the Mississippi. Oil refineries on the Mississippi River aren't likely affected so far, with the nearest being Ergon Refinery, a small plant in Vicksburg. That's actually below where we're seeing the shortage right now. Still, about 5.4 million barrels of crude and refined product moved by tanker and barge between the Midwest and Gulf Coast each month. Valero's Mississippi refinery sends products by barge north and east of the river, while Phillips 66 Wood River refinery in Illinois also moves product by barge. Again, the area we're seeing is south of Memphis to Greenville in Mississippi right now. Finally here, coal. The Mississippi River is a major thoroughfare for thermal coal. Any snags threaten to disrupt a trade at a time when coal demand is soaring as Europe's weathers an energy crisis exacerbated by Russia's war in Ukraine. About 35% of U.S. thermal coal for export travels on the Mississippi. So this will significantly affect the market. It will be a big disruption to supply. So fertilizer, obviously huge impact. Grain, massive impact. Oil, not so much. Coal, an impact, definitely. Let's pull up some of the stats and details here. So this is the NOAA map we had for the lower Mississippi the other day. Green indicates the gauges are good. Brown indicates low water, and the brown is right here, right up and down the entire Mississippi. So here's Memphis. And again, if you look at that Memphis information, you can see how low the water is from where it typically is. We're talking quite a distance lower than it normally is. Here's the next reading just south of Memphis. Again, we are below the low water typically, and all the way down here to about Vicksburg, or this is actually Greenville. This is where you see it at low. When you get down here to Vicksburg, this is where you're seeing it just below that level. So that stretch from Memphis down to Vicksburg is where we're definitely seeing the low water problems. This comes from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and this is their annual report on freight. And I just wanted to throw this up here because, again, I want to show you some of the importance that we have here for how freight moves around the country. And you'll hear all the time that we don't use the Jones Act for moving freight around the United States. We do. All this traffic moving up and down the Mississippi is Jones Act traffic. It is all done in compliance with U.S. laws, with U.S. barges and U.S. crews and U.S. personnel. So, I mean, we're moving tons of goods this way. And this dark blue area here is where you see that down the Ohio, all the way down the Mississippi, down here to the very southern reaches of it. So we're already seeing this huge amount of traffic come down. This one is interesting because this is gateways of shipping. This is how you bring cargo in. These are the international gateways. And notice down here, the Port of New Orleans, not a major gateway at all. It's not a gateway for bringing cargo in and out. We just don't see it. LA and Long Beach, obviously, are big for that. New York, New Jersey, we see that. We see the gateways across the southern border there, the northern border, but really not a lot for New Orleans. When you start talking about top water... let me go back over here a second. Top water ports here. This is by TEUs. Again, New Orleans, very small. Doesn't handle a lot of containers. Where are we seeing containers being handled? Savannah, Charleston, New York, New Jersey, LA, Long Beach. You see them handled there. That's what we've been talking about the whole time. But then you get to this. Top water ports by tonnage. And this is where the Gulf Coast and the inland waterways come into their own. And one of the biggest here is South Louisiana. And you see it right here. This is the huge circle that is South Louisiana. Houston is over here. Houston is doing oil. South Louisiana is doing grain, but you also throw in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and you can see how significant the amount of tonnage that comes down the Mississippi River is insane. People do not understand how important this waterway is to American economic success. Everything, and you look at here from the Missouri all the way up into South Dakota, the Mississippi up into Minnesota, and the Ohio up into Pennsylvania, along with tributaries into Tennessee and Arkansas and even into Oklahoma. These are absolutely strategic waterways, and the Mississippi Basin does it. Just look at this, and again, it's divided into imports, very small, but then it talks about exports. This is the stuff that's coming out, but look how much is domestic. Over half that cargo in the southern Louisiana is just moving domestically within the United States. And I think that is a significant element that we don't ever talk about enough, is the importance of this. If you want to follow a great organization, the American Waterways Organization. The AWO is kind of the group that advocates for American shipping firms on the inland waterways. And they do a journal. You can follow along with them. They got a newsletter you can follow. Just to give you some stats here, because I think it's always interesting to have some stats. So 115 barge tow, and that's the standard, again, especially above the locks. This is about the biggest you can have is a 15 barge tow. That's equivalent to 216 rail cars and 6 locomotives, or over 1,000 trucks. Over 1,000 trucks with one barge and tow. Now, it is interesting, too, is personnel differences here. Obviously, you would have to have 1,050 truck drivers to do this. You would have to have 6 locomotives, which is probably more than 2 trains, so 2 people on a train. 115 barge tow, I think you're talking probably about 10 people on board. I'll let my people who know this better than I do talk about it. I think that's about the usual crew size you have on board with captain, pilot, mate, deckhands, and everybody else. It may be a little bit less than that. But, you know, it is an efficient way to move things. And then if you break it down even more, what can one of those barges carry? So again, 15 barges. Well, one single, for example, liquid barge can carry up to 27,500 barrels of cargo. 27,500 barrels, by the way, 42 gallons in a barrel. That's enough to keep 2,500 automobiles running for an entire year. That's equivalent to 46 rail cars, 144 trucks. Go to a barge. A barge can carry about 1,750 short tons of dry cargo. The normal rail car can carry about 100 tons, so about 16 rail cars, 70 trucks. It gives you the idea, one loaded barge can carry 58,333 bushels, enough to make 2.5 million loaves of bread. Man, that is a lot of bread. What does this all mean? Well, obviously, we should all be doing our best to hope for rain in the Midwest. What we need is rain. The Army Corps of Engineers, along with the Coast Guard, will do everything they can to get traffic moving on the Mississippi. What this is unfortunately going to entail is lighter loaded barges. And that means less cargo coming down until the river starts coming up. And the only way for that to happen is for water to start to fall in the Midwest. We're going to be constrained in the amount of cargo coming down. What this means is American farmers are not going to be able to get their crops into market. They're going to lose money. Inflation when it comes to the cost of consumer goods, food, it just has huge ramifications for the United States. And it's why the inland waterways are so important for us. The men and women that operate the towboats and tows out in the Midwest are absolutely essential to the success of the United States and its economy. And again, we owe them our thanks. Another key element of the supply chain. We talk about trucks, we talk about rail, we talk about pilots, we talk about international shipping. Let's talk about inland waterways for just a bit. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Give it a thumbs up, share it across social media, leave a comment. And if you can, support the page. You can do that one of two ways. You can hit that super thanks button below and contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon. You'll see the link come up here at the end or in the show notes. You can become a monthly or yearly patron of the page. That helps me keep this page up and running to bring you information about global and inland waterway shipping. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.